Good afternoon. As you start to write or maybe continue to write part 2 of your paper, I wanted to give you a few pointers to consider and things to keep in mind as you are writing. From the very beginning, point number 1 I would say to you is to be sure you have a running head with a title. You do not need to include an abstract in this paper or any other section of your paper as we move forward. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, when you're doing your introduction, it really is kind of a smaller version of what you did in the first part. The most important part is that you're telling me the curriculum that you are analyzing and the focus of the paper, and then indicate where the curriculum is being implemented, the district, the school, the grade level, and then indicate your role within the school and your experience in teaching the curriculum. So it's really a smaller version of what you should have done in the first part, but those are the essential parts that need to be included. Now, another point to be made about the paper in general. As you start a new section, and essentially you're going to have 4 sections. You're going to have your introduction, but after your introduction you're going to talk about models, curriculum elements, or design elements, then design qualities, and then aims, goals, and objectives. But as you start new sections, it's important to have an introduction to each section. And infuse Henson quotes or other sources as a way to kind of introduce what you're going to discuss in that particular section of your paper. Point number 4, you need, if you are going to cite an interview, it's important that in parentheses you would put the title, the first initial and the last name of the person you interviewed, personal communication, and then the date of the interview. But you don't need to cite interviews in the reference list. And so I say that for every class because that's an error that some people make. Point number 5, be sure you use appropriate in-text citation. Author, date, page numbers if it's a direct quote. One thing I would say about websites that you're using, especially if you're using something like MSDE or your school district's website, it's not going to be the title of the page. The author is really the person organization that owns the content of the web page, and oftentimes that is found at the bottom of the page with a date. And so, for example, you might have in parentheses, like a Maryland report card information, MSDE, 2019. So you're looking for those larger organizations that own that content, and the date is often at the bottom versus putting no date. Another point, as you use different headings for different sections, so in the model section, in the design elements, and even in the design qualities, you might want to have each piece be a separate title, a separate heading. So for example, in the models, if you're going to talk about Ames model, then Ames would be underneath models. Your one heading might be, another heading might be Ames, and then another, after you talk about that one, then another smaller heading for the TABA model, and then another heading for the Oliva model, if those are the 3. Now, I would do the same thing maybe for the design elements. You have design as your main heading, and then underneath that, the first one you might talk about would be the Trump plan, and then underneath that one might be the spiral curriculum. So whichever ones that apply, you just might want to have them be separate headings in order to ensure that is very clear what model or design element or design quality that you're talking about. So the next part is be sure to address in the models and the design elements at least 4 models into 4 design elements. So whatever they are, but make sure you're addressing 4 of them. And in the model section, you may need to make some inferences, because it can be difficult to make judgments just by what you're observing in looking at the document. And so I would encourage you to look at the narration of overview of the assignment, so that you get a better sense of that section when I'm talking about making inferences. Now, another point to be made is that when you're talking about these models, Taba's model, Oliva's model, Alexander, McDonald, whatever it is, you do not need to include every single element or every single step. You only need to discuss the ones that most apply to your curriculum that you see. And then you might highlight any glaring element that is missing. For example, you might have one where it says at the end that there should be continuous curriculum evaluation, and you might say to yourself, I don't see that in my curriculum, or I don't know that we have that as something that we're constantly looking at our curriculum. And it might be just a part that's always missing, because the only thing you didn't know is that you get a new curriculum handed to you. So things to keep in mind connected to models. And then another piece is that when you discuss the design elements, Trump plan, spiral curriculum, whatever, you need to make sure that you're including the strengths and the weaknesses, and those are especially in the text, but also in the narrated PowerPoints that I put up about the design elements. So you might want to review that so you're more clear about the strengths and the weaknesses that you might include. Point number 10, when you're discussing the aims, goals, and objectives. So in this particular part, in the first part, you could touch on the overall aims and goals of the curriculum, and you might touch on things like the whole purpose of the curriculum, the driving force centers around having kids be be college and career ready. Another part, you might say the whole general purpose of the curriculum is to look at 21st century skills in a changing workforce and make sure kids have those skills. You might even make a connection between the aims and goals of your curriculum and then looking at the aims and goals and the mission and vision of your school and or your school district. So you can look at those things and maybe make connections of wanting kids to be lifelong learners and then being able to be citizens in a global world. So you might be able to make those connections too if you research that a little bit. Point number 11. Also in his aims and goals, you're looking at the objectives. And really what your essential question is this: to what degree do I see the cognitive, affective, and the psychomotor domain reflected in the curriculum? Now, you'll need to provide specific examples like you did in the discussion boards, and you can use those if they're appropriate. And then so the objectives, and then what level that they demonstrate, and then also explaining why you selected that objective. You may find that your curriculum really only focuses on the cognitive domain and not really give any attention to the other two domains. So don't feel like you have to force objectives to fit into the affective and psychomotor domains if there are none there. And it's also important in this section, in the last part of this section, is to discuss changes that you think could be made to enhance the standards, the indicators, and or the objectives. you might find that there aren't any objectives that teachers have to make them up. You may find that there needs to be a better balance between lower level objectives and higher order skills, and then there may also need to be a greater focus on including affective and psychomotor domains because they're absent altogether. So, I hope this helps. I've also attached the overview document of the assignment and the narrated overview of the assignment that was done by Dr. Aiken, which I think might help you as you write each section. I would encourage you to review this prior to starting your paper or finishing it so that you have a solid understanding of what's expected in each section. Be sure you review the PowerPoints on each part as a way to have a stronger understanding of each model, design element, or strengths and weaknesses of the models that you need to include. So, please contact me at any point if you have questions, concerns, or you just want to review your thinking with me about something that you want to include to ensure that you're on the right track. I want you to be successful. Last but not least, keep being active in the threads through the remainder of the module. Be sure you complete the final learning logs and then pace yourself as you're writing this paper. And finally, I would say this to you. Above all things, enjoy your family time on the 4th of July. Take a rest day. Enjoy family because that's really the most important thing. All right? Have a happy 4th. Enjoy yourself, and I look forward to reading your papers. Thanks.